Okay, title of today's lecture is Neural Anatomy. We are looking at the microscopic or fine anatomy of a neuron or nerve cell. Okay. Now remember, a neuron is a biological wire. They are living wires. Okay. We're going to start here at the top. We're going to draw one of these and kind of bring it to a point right there, like a teardrop sideways. I'd say like a raindrop, but it turns out now that we have like really fast cameras and stuff like that, we found out that raindrops are actually spheres. Perfect little spheres that fall. Well, not perfect because they're moving, but yeah, they don't actually look like that. Anyway, neural anatomy. We've got this little thing right here, which is where you'd find the majority of cell stuff. This is where all the machinery of the cell is. You know, your mitochondria, your Golgi body, all that kind. Well, not just here for the Golgi body, but most of the cell machinery, the nucleus and stuff is here. And this part of the cell is called the soma. Soma, otherwise known as the cell body. So if you see those terms, it's the same thing. I just wanted to be familiar with it. Now, what I'm going to draw next is going to be terrible and frustrating, but also accurate, and the reason these things actually work. So we're going to draw kind of a long tail that sort of moves back and forth, and it's really long, so much so we got to kind of turn this way on the paper. And we're going to bring it all the way around, and we're going to encase the notes in it today. And we'll end it here with these little crazy looking forks there. Okay, so that's the end of it. Rolling back around, to boom. Okay, this whole big shebang right here, this whole thing, some of you already know. What's this called? Just kidding, maybe you don't know. It's called the axon. It's the whole long thing. That's the wire part, gang. These things are super long. Well, how long? I mean, cells aren't that big. You're right. Cells are microscopic. But in some cells, this thing can be up to 1 meter in length. Even though cells are microscopic, some of them will have an axon that exceeds 1 meter, like the ones that go through your spinal cord and down your leg. You may have one single axon that's that long. It's incredible. All right, so the soma, axon. Where the axon ends is kind of the same thing as where the airport ends. Okay? What do you call the thing where the airport ends and the plane begins? A terminal. And these things right here are axon terminals. Axon terminals, these dudes right here. Okay. So now we got the main machinery of the cell. We've got the thing that it's sending stuff along. But we're missing a couple important details. But let me add some things here. I'm going to draw some arrows that are going this way, because that is the only direction that electrical impulses can travel, is this way, toward the axon terminal. They cannot go the other way. Now, a wire can send electricity any direction. It really doesn't matter, okay? And those things can send it however they want to go, but our wires, our neurons, can really only send impulses in that direction. Okay? So nothing can go the opposite way. That's why we have afferent and efferent neurons in the peripheral nervous system. We have to have some that are set up to go one way and some that are set up to go the other way. Okay. So this point where the axon meets the soma, this little section right here, is called the Axon Hillock. I promise I'll leave you enough room in here to write our notes for today. Axon Hillock. Okay. Now, how do we know what to send or when to send? That has everything to do with what's going on up here. And these are going to take up most of this space in here. And there's tons of them. Just tons of them. AP Bio, or I'm sorry, AP Psych students, what are these things called? Or do I have any in here? Remember what those are? That's okay.
No,
These things are called dendrites. These things are called dendrites. Let me tell you what's ironic. Right now, while you're learning what a dendrite is, dendrites are growing in your brain and connecting to other cells. That's what learning is. That's what a new memory is these things reaching out and making a new connection. It doesn't actually touch, but man, it gets as close as it possibly can without touching. I can't really do it because I've had a lot of caffeine. My fingers are shaky, and if I try to get them close, they're going to touch. But you get the idea. They get as close as they can without touching. So when one of these makes a connection, so at a cellular level, what learning is connections, which is why connections help us so greatly when we're learning new material. If you can try in your brain to connect things to things you already know or you've already learned in some way, that's why it's easier, because learning anything new is connecting. Okay? So dendrites are connecting to other neurons. Okay? So now I mentioned these are wires, okay? And I just did some wiring very recently. I put two lights in. I put a light in my new house because I just got married. So my fiance's old house, we're together now, and so my wife and I decided that the bedroom closet needed a light, and also that the pantry closet needed a light. So I put some in there. And the wire I use for that is something called Romex. Okay, if you've ever seen Romex, anybody ever seen it before? Romex has got 3 wires in it. One that's black, one that's white, and one that's not insulated. But it's covered with a sheath that is a yellow in color, which is how they can tell whether or not your house is built to specs before you put the sheetrock on, because they're like, look and make sure all the wires are the right color. But what kind of metal is in those wires? Copper. And it's clearly copper colored, but you see that they're not. You won't ever see bare copper, or you shouldn't see bare copper wires in somebody's house. Why not? It's dangerous. It's bad. If you got a lamp plugged in and your cat decides that it wants to snack on that insulation on the outside, first of all, that could be all 9 lives right there, okay, as we learned from Christmas Vacation, okay? But there is something that surrounds those wires to protect them, to insulate those wires. Romex wire is covered by that, the whole thing's covered by insulation. And 2 of these wires inside of it are covered with insulation as well, okay? Because you don't want that electrical current to go places it's not supposed to. Now, our biological wires also have the potential to be insulated, and many of them are. And here's what their insulation looks like. I'm going to draw it as little boxes, but it's a little more complex than this, and I'll show you how and why. But let's go ahead and box in this whole deal here. Do you remember yesterday, you wrote in your notes that there's only 2 types of cells that exist in the nervous system? What were they? Neurons and neuroglia. What we've drawn here is a neuron. That's the living wire. Guess what these little boxes are? They are neuroglia. I heard somebody say it all mystical. Neuroglia. Oh, yeah. Okay. These things serve to insulate. Now on this particular neuron, these types of cells are called Schwann cells. Schwann cells, named after the scientist who discovered them, I believe. And they insulate. There's little gaps in between them too. They don't all touch one another. These gaps are a lot shorter than what I've drawn, so they're kind of exaggerated here. But I understand the axon is the whole long thing. But the gap in between is something called a node of Ranvier. Node of Ranvier. There's little gaps in there. Now water. Is water polar or non-polar?
Polar.
It's polar. Does water conduct electricity? Do you want to throw a toaster in the bathtub? No, you don't. First of all, don't make toast in there. Just do that in the kitchen. Second of all, it's dangerous because it will electrocute somebody. I've heard it said pure water doesn't conduct electricity, but you're going to have a hard time getting that to come out of a tap. Okay? So, we don't want these insulators really to necessarily be chocked full of water. They're full of something else to help do the job here. It's not that they don't have cytoplasm, it's just they have something else that does a better job insulating in them. They're filled with fat. Yep. So even your brain is fat. Sorry. It's good for you though. Which is also, I understand why polar bears, they actually like eating the brains of, it's gross, but of the salmon. Like when they grab salmon, they crunch in and they like the brains because it's fatty and that's good. They're like, that's delicious. Not that they don't eat the flesh. Sorry to our viewers at home for that graphic description. Anyway, so here's the deal. Not all of them have to be insulated, but many of them are. Okay. Some axons, in fact, I'd venture to say most axons are insulated by glial cells. Remember, glial cells are another term for microglia. I'm sorry, not microglia, for neuroglia. This is one type. There's another type that myelinates axons. There's another type that helps myelinate cell bodies and things like that. But they're insulated by glial cells. If, and this is to clear up terminology, if they are insulated in this way, they are referred to as myelinated. They're referred to as myelinated. So some call the insulation surrounding an axon the myelin sheath. So if you hear that term, that's what that means. It just means it's insulated. Now I said that these cells here are filled with what? Are filled with fat, okay? Because they're filled with fat, they have a different color. You guys ever make bacon? Isn't it great? Sorry. But if you have bacon, you make bacon, you end up with like half the bacon that you cook because the rest of it like cooks out. And when you let it set, what color is it? The stuff, the grease, what does it set up to? White. It sets up to like a white color because that triglyceride fat that we store, that pigs store, that cows store is white in color. Sometimes it pitches just a little bit yellow, but yeah, it's usually just white in color. So cells that myelinate okay, like this guy right here. Cells that myelinate are filled with fat or lipids, much in the same way that your adipose tissue is stored. There's like a big vacuole and they're loaded down with this stuff, are filled with lipids, okay? We've already established fat is white. Therefore, portions of the nervous system that are myelinated are white and called, this is brilliant, ready? White matter. Portions of the nervous system that are unmyelinated are, any guesses? Gray. And gray we're going to spell with an A because we're American, okay? If we were British, we'd spell it with an E. I remember A for America, E for England. But both are correct. You can spell it both ways. Are gray. And called gray matter. Now, the thing about this, gang, is portions that have a whole lot of axons. Here's some good examples. Are you ready? Any cranial nerve or spinal nerve or your spinal cord or like the optic nerve or any just gigantic, or they're all just like gigantic bundles of axons, which is why they're white, because they're insulated or myelinated. They're also why they're difficult to repair. If people have damage to their spinal cord or optic nerve, what you have is a severing across millions and millions of axons that can't line themselves back up again and can't appropriately repair themselves, which is why those surgeries are impossible, let alone difficult. Okay? Now, when they myelinate, they don't just kind of box around like this. I want to show you how that process looks. So let's say that this was an axon right here. This would be a Schwann cell. And what they do, Dixon Ticonderoga is the best pencil they make. I didn't get paid for that. It just really is a great pencil. Okay. What they do is they will wrap around like this. Not just once, but they will wrap around and they will squeeze, and squeeze like I wanted to say fatty goodness. I don't know why. Squeeze the fatty goodness around there over and over and over again. So what you end up having in each section that has a Schwann cell or another type of myelinating cell on an axon is you end up having dozens and dozens of layers of it all the way around like that. Okay? So it's not just that it sits on top. It wraps around many, many, many times. Then the nucleus is going to be just like a lump in there in that spot. So like from a side view, here's a cross section of myelinated axon. So if we do this right here, here's the axon, and we start our cell right there, and we'll loop it around a few times. A bit of lump right there, and we'll end it there. That lump will be the nucleus. Okay, so axon, and this could be like a Schwann cell. So they like loop around, and this is like small in comparison. Normally they'll myelinate, they'll wrap around, 10, 12, 15, 20 times to wrap around like that. Good layers of insulation. Speaking of myelin, one of some of the diseases that cause people to lose control of their skeletal muscle and whatnot are actually demyelinating diseases that actually cause this myelin sheath to wear off. And also, in the first year of your life is when you're growing a lot of these, which is why, you know, little babies, their movements are kind of jerky and out of control. They're not just learning how to use their limbs. Their structures here are becoming myelinated so they can have better control over. Some of those spastic movements are because they're not completely myelinated yet. Okay, let's finish out here. Types of neurons. Okay, first one is the one we've drawn here as our main, like, flagship neuron with all that stuff like that. I've drawn the shortened version of it right here. And that's called a multipolar neuron. The second neuron, we're going to draw this soma in the middle and these extensions coming out like that. This one is called a bipolar neuron. Let's see if you can figure out the pattern here. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm right on the line, huh? Bipolar neuron. Then this guy right here. What do you think he's going to be called? That is a unipolar. Did you pick up on the pattern? They are named for the number of connections to the soma. This one has just one. This one has how many? 2. And this one has many, as the dendrites come directly out as a big bundle to the, as a whole bunch of bundles attached there to the soma. The last one has nothing to do with how these other ones are. It's named for the fact that it doesn't have an axon. It just has all of these extensions jamming out each way there. Okay. The prefix A means without. Unless the word starts with a vowel, then the prefix is an. So this one is called an anaxonic neuron. Like anaerobic, without oxygen in that case. Anaxonic, it has no axon. So that will do it for today.